He thought I didn't know. That's what still gets me. Craig believed his quiet lies would dissolve into the space between us, that if he stayed calm long enough, I would stay silent forever. And for a while, I did. My name is Melanie Fletcher. I'm 36, and I work in a library on the east side of Gainesville. I spend my days cataloging things other people forget. Out-of-print books. Newspaper clippings. Marginalia. I have a soft voice. People say I'm quiet. Thoughtful. The kind who never causes trouble. Craig is the opposite. A tall man with a builder's hands and an engineer's mind. People like him. He knows how to keep eye contact just long enough. He's patient, persuasive, and always just a little condescending. We were married for 9 years. And I thought we were fine. Until one day, I realized I hadn't laughed around him in almost 6 months. He started working late more often. Leaving his phone face down. Changing passwords. Smelling like unfamiliar cologne. All the signs were there if I'd wanted to see them. But I didn't want signs. I wanted proof. So I began to record. It started innocently. I was reorganizing the kitchen drawers and found the old digital recorder we used when practicing speeches for his presentations. I kept it in my purse. Turned it on every few days when we were alone. Just to hear how he sounded when he said, "Nothing's wrong." At first, I listened out of fear. Then I started listening for patterns. He had tells. Little ones. The way his voice clipped at the end of sentences. How he paused before saying my name. His calm wasn't calm, it was control. I didn't confront him. I asked things sideways. What did you do last night after work? You were quiet this morning. Do you still feel connected to us? To me. Each time, he gave me just enough to feel guilty for asking. You worry too much. Work's been stressful. You're not making this easy. So I stopped asking. And I kept recording. He never hit me. Never yelled. He didn't need to. His distance was weapon enough. We still had dinner together. Still hosted friends. Still smiled in photos. But inside our house, there was a silence that grew like smoke in a closed room. I started hiding the recordings in USB drives. Labeled them as book lists. Stored them in a locked metal box under my side of the bed. Not because I planned to use them. Just because I needed a version of my life that couldn't be erased by his voice. One night, after a particularly cold dinner, I stood in the bathroom brushing my teeth and looked at myself in the mirror for a full 5 minutes. I looked the same. But I couldn't remember the last time I felt like myself. I reached into the cabinet, took the recorder out of my purse, and pressed record. And into the mirror, I said. He thinks I don't know. But I do. I just don't know what to do with it yet. Then I turned off the recorder, hit it again, and went to bed beside the man who didn't know he was being watched by the only person still paying attention. It happened on a Thursday. I had spent the afternoon at my sister's house across town. We were reorganizing old family photo albums. Laughing in that easy way only siblings can. It was the first time in weeks I hadn't thought about Craig. Driving home just after sunset, I turned onto our street and saw the sky glowing orange. At first, I thought it was the neighbor's porch light. Then I saw the smoke. Thick, dark, rising in heavy spirals. My house was on fire. Flames crawled up the siding like fingers. Windows burst one by one. People were outside, some filming, some just watching. I didn't scream. I pulled over, got out, and stared. By the time the firefighters got it under control, everything was gone. Inside that house was my history. My wedding dress. My childhood journals. My USB drives. My recordings. All of it ashes. Except for one thing. In the days after, Craig told everyone it was an accident. Faulty wiring. Old fuse box. He even said he'd been planning to fix it. He was calm. Collected. Too calm. He filed the insurance claim the next morning. Something inside me snapped into place. I went back to the wreckage 2 days later, when they let me in. What I found was half buried under scorched wood and wet insulation, a small metal box. Charred. Warped. But intact. Inside was a melted USB, and my digital recorder. The screen was cracked. The button stuck. But when I pressed play, I heard static. Then my own voice. He thinks I don't know. But I do. And then, silence. Craig looked me in the eye that night and said, "It's just stuff. We'll rebuild." I said nothing. Because I knew he wasn't talking about the house. The digital recorder didn't look like much. It was scorched on one side, the screen cracked, one corner melted in. But I took it to a data recovery lab in Tallahassee anyway. Quiet place, unassuming building. The technician said not to get my hopes up. Fire does more than burn, he warned. It erases. But 3 days later, he called. "There's something here," he said. "You need to hear it." I sat in a dim room, the recorder wired to a playback console. The technician pressed a few keys. Static. Then. Craig's voice. Unmistakable. "Gotta do it tonight. Timing matters. She's out at her sister's till 9. Gasoline's in the shed." A pause. Shuffling sounds. Then. "If she finds out, everything collapses." Then the sound of a match striking. Nothing else. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I copied the file onto a USB. I thanked the technician. And I drove straight to the police station. The detective who originally handled the fire was skeptical. Until he heard the clip. Then everything changed. Craig was arrested that evening just as he was withdrawing a final transfer from the insurance settlement. Arson. Insurance fraud. Attempted destruction of evidence. They called it one of the cleanest digital testimonies they'd ever received. I testified before the grand jury. They played the clip. I said nothing more than I had to. Truth needs fewer words. Craig didn't look at me in court. He pled not guilty. Claimed the recording was edited. But the timestamps, the background sounds, it was airtight. The trial date was set. The media got wind of it. I stayed out of sight. But I wrote a blog at first. Just a few paragraphs. Then longer posts. People read. People responded. Women wrote me their own stories. A producer reached out. Asked if I'd ever thought of telling the full thing, in my own voice. And that's how Ashes of Us was born. A podcast not about fire but about what stays behind. Not just about Craig. But about silence, and what it costs. In the first episode, I played the recording. Craig's voice. That match. And then mine. He thinks I don't know. But I do. I didn't have to say more. Because the fire had already spoken for me. The apartment is small. 1 bedroom. A desk near the window. A second-hand couch. Quiet neighbors who don't ask questions. The kind of place where you can disappear without vanishing. It suits me. Most of my days now are spent writing. Reading emails. Editing audio. Listening to the silence between people's sentences. The podcast grew faster than I expected. Not viral. But real. Steady. Women from all over the country started sending in their own recordings. Stories of gaslighting, erasure, betrayal without bruises. Some were shaky. Some were raw. All of them honest. That was the point. Ashes of Us isn't about revenge. It's about naming what people tried to burn. Craig was sentenced to 12 years. No appeal. No outburst. He didn't even speak at the sentencing. He just looked down. The prosecutor asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement. I declined. My words had already been recorded. And played. He didn't need more from me. And I didn't owe him anything. Sometimes people ask if I still think about him. If I hate him. If I'd ever speak to him again. I don't hate him. I just don't carry him anymore. Control needs oxygen. And I've stopped breathing for him. Once a week, I record in my little studio, really just a closet with foam on the walls. I sit. I press record. And I talk. Sometimes it's my story. Sometimes it's someone else's. But it's always ours. There's no intro music. No dramatic effects. Just voice. In the final episode of my first season, I said this. I used to think he'd lie forever. That he'd rewrite our life until only his version survived. But he made one mistake. He tried to erase sound with fire. But fire burns. And sound lives. Then I let the silence play for a full 30 seconds. Because I wanted every woman listening to know. There is power in what remains. Even if all that's left is ashes and a voice that refuses to be silenced. Melanie's story ended in smoke. But Jerome's story will end in silence. The kind that's planned. Cold. Meticulous. He thought he was the one in control. He thought cheating made him powerful. He thought no one saw the lies. But his wife did. And instead of confronting him, she waited. She planned. For 2 years. Not to kill him. Not to expose him. But to strip him of everything. His money, his career, his legacy. And make sure he lived long enough to watch it all fall apart. Because some betrayals don't end in flames. They end in ruins. Next, Jerome from Rome, he was cheating. But she was plotting something worse.